Cisco Eagle. We're pleased that you're all able to join us today. Please forgive us for a couple of technical difficulties. We seem to be having a little bit of feedback as people join in on the audio here. Hopefully that will just be at the beginning of our call. Before we begin, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. I'd like to ask at this time that everyone mute their telephone so that our presenter is not competing with any background noise. You should have been automatically muted as you join the audio.
Clark Stewart.
Joined.
As a housekeeping measure. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, I'd ask that you submit them using the chat function. That will be in the lower left-hand side of your screen. You can type any question in the box there, and your question will appear on mine and Evan's screen.
Joined.
Rod Mamula.
Joined.
Jim Banta.
Joined.
My apologies. Today's webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on PPSA's website within the next couple of weeks. The slides will also be made available to the participants as well once the recording is posted. Would just like to remind everyone that this webinar is being conducted in accordance with PPSA's antitrust policy. Primarily that means that we will not be discussing any pricing or anything else that would violate that policy. Clearwater paper.
Joined. Joined.
So I'm going to go put my phone on mute, so hopefully we don't have any more feedback as people join the audio here, and we'll pass this on over to Evan.
All right, thank you so much. So like mentioned, this is a presentation on basically forklift pedestrian safety on how to reduce the risks. So thanks for attending, and welcome to this safety presentation from Cisco Eagle. And as mentioned before, I'm your host, Evan Fleischacker. I hope everybody's having a good day so far.
Joined.
Today our presentation is going to be covering the topic of reducing risks in forklift pedestrian interaction. So a little bit about Cisco Eagle, just to cover that. We are a national and international material handling systems integration company. We serve customers in all 50 states and over 70 nations.
John Williams.
Joined.
And have experience in safety
Joined.
and implementation.
Joined.
Over 5 years ago, we started getting more requests from customers for safety-specific products and services. Sensing that need, we then created a division focused solely on the design and manufacture of safety products with an emphasis on forklift safety. A little background about myself. So I started with Cisco Eagle in 2016, and I work with our safety products division.
Joined.
I frequently attend PPSA, ASSP, and NSC shows. You can find articles that I write on forklift pedestrian safety on the Cisco Eagle blog.
Joined.
So for this presentation, we want to cover and focus on two main objectives. And those objectives are
Joined.
to help you understand the threat forklifts compose to pedestrians and to review the keys for creating a facility-wide forklift pedestrian safety process.
Joined.
First off, we want to talk to you about why this process of reducing these interactions is important. As you can see from this graphic that we've got on this slide, these OSHA statistics tell us that American workers suffer roughly 85 deaths 35,000 serious injuries, and another 62,000 non-serious injuries every year related to forklifts. Within those different types that are listed below, you can see that those involving pedestrian forklift interactions are the following. The first one, at 25%, is accidents where someone is crushed between the vehicle and a surface. The second one, at 11%, are accidents where someone is crushed between two vehicles. And the third one listed here, at 10%, is an accident where someone is struck or run over by a forklift. Adding those three types of listings up, it shows us that around 46% of these yearly accidents involve a pedestrian or someone other than the forklift driver. Now, these numbers are certainly eye-catching, but with the process in place, you can help your facility avoid them. Another thing these numbers highlight is the inherent danger of a forklift. So, forklifts aren't cars, and they don't behave like one. The average car weighs, roughly 3,000 pounds, while the average forklift weighs somewhere around 9,000 pounds. And that is a significant difference. With that, forklifts don't maneuver or brake as well as cars, and in addition, they have a worse line of sight for the driver. Forklift drivers also spend a lot of time moving around in reverse or driving with a raised load. And both situations reduce visibility and attention paid to surrounding pedestrians. Most importantly when regarding forklifts is that the dangers are constant. And that's because in most facilities, the forklifts used are always moving around. Pedestrians in your facility might not be aware of all of these aspects of a forklift, and therefore they may misunderstand the way forklifts maneuver and the dangers of walking or working around them. All it takes is one instance where this lack of knowledge can yield some dangerous results. And here I'm going to show a video. I'll let you watch it first, real quick. So here we have a video that shows the inherent dangers of forklift pedestrian interactions within a facility. A sort of formula for tragedy, if you will. This video highlights a number of items that we just discussed. So let's go over a couple of them. First off, we can see that the pedestrian is clearly not paying attention. Second, the forklift driver has his forks up and a load on them, so visibility is low. Finally, there are no signals or barriers in place to help protect the pedestrian from oncoming forklift traffic in this zone. With that in mind, there are also a couple of quick ideas on the contributing factors from this video. So possibly installing a safety gate that might help keep the pedestrian from interacting with the forklift. Additionally, we can see that sight lines for the pedestrian are obstructed by the rack that is located against the wall. And because of obstructions like this, these types of egress points will always be a concern. And to mention a personal note. While we didn't have an accident such as this to spur our actions, our Dallas warehouse did have a couple of entry points that had less than ideal visibility for both forklift drivers and pedestrians. We worked within the process that we're going to discuss and created some solutions that have helped keep our warehouse accident-free. With these dangers in mind, here's some steps that we recommend when creating your forklift pedestrian safety process, and we'll go over each of these in detail. Step 1 is to assemble a cross-functional forklift safety team. Step 2 is to develop a baseline assessment. Step 3, identify the forklift pedestrian interaction zone in your facility. Step 4, you want to assess the risks at each of those interaction zones that you've identified. Step 5 is to implement safety upgrades once you've assessed and identified the risks in those zones. And step 6 is to measure your progress. So let's begin with step 1, assembling a cross-functional forklift safety team. So this team will want to work with the safety department in helping to lead this process. You'll want to include a manageable number of employees to form your team, and you also want to make sure that it's a diverse group, because each member that you want to bring on should represent a distinct viewpoint and opinion. You'll want to look to draw from those types of employees in your facility that interact with forklifts on a daily basis. And I've listed some examples here. Supervisors or foremen within your facility. You also might want to include forklift operators, since they have a fairly unique perspective. Safety and EHS personnel, of course, goes without saying. And possibly some various warehouse employees, specifically those who work in areas with high forklift traffic. And I give a couple of examples, such as order pickers and those within the shipping and receiving area. One other that's not on the slide, but you could also add possibly a non-warehouse employee, someone who works in the office area but occasionally goes into the warehouse or facility area where there are forklifts moving around. This can be a helpful addition because while they don't interact on possibly a day-to-day basis, their minimal interaction with forklift traffic offers yet another unique perspective that those in the warehouse might not have. Once you form this team, you'll want to review the responsibilities of this group so that each member is on the same page. And these responsibilities, they should include, first, collaboration in developing a baseline analysis. Second, working together to conduct risk assessments of high traffic areas within your facility. And finally, creating actionable solutions that can be used. Let's cover the next step in this process, which is developing a baseline assessment. To begin this part of the process, you'll want to document the current conditions within your facility. And when doing so, you want to make sure that you include the following factors. You want to know what cross-functional information is available to determine facility-wide issues. And you want to look at the assets that assets in place that you currently have at your disposal. And you'll definitely want to review the current processes or behaviors in your facility. And these can range from a number of possible items in place. We recommend using a survey or a guide, and the reason why is that using one of those will provide you with the right questions to ask when assessing your facility or an area within your facility. Some questions that we recommend asking are those like, what exists now at your facility that segregates vehicles from pedestrians? With this question, you can focus on the smaller details as well, such as if there are any audio or visual control systems that are currently installed, and whether you have any onboard controls on your existing forklifts. Another set of questions that you could ask involves the current behaviors for drivers and pedestrians. So for example, you could ask, how often do pedestrians move through a space also occupied by vehicles? Has an accident or near miss involving forklifts occurred in any of these areas? And finally, are there unprotected pedestrians interacting with vehicles in this certain area? Now, on this slide, I'm showing an example of a survey, and this is one of our surveys that we offer to customers that are looking to review areas within their facility. So, we offer a safety survey that can aid the group in documenting these and many more issues that could affect forklift and pedestrian interaction. Now, this isn't the entire survey, of course. This is just a quick snippet that showcases the types of questions that our survey asks and how the layout of the survey is conducted. We have provided this survey and would be happy to share this document with you at the end of the presentation upon request as well. That's a good example. So when you're developing a baseline assessment, you're going to want to focus on the following factors that we're going to talk about. The first is elimination. So as you can gauge from the picture, what we're talking about in this scenario is an area purposely set up for foot traffic only, with no forklifts allowed at all. These areas should have guardrails or other physical barriers to protect pedestrians. As you can see from our example image that we have here, it shows a steel guardrail that that's there to separate the two types of traffic. You could also use visual methods such as painted or taped crosswalks to mark these types of zones as well, but just be aware they won't be as effective as a physical barrier. One other thing when talking about guardrails specifically is to be aware that regarding guardrails that there are no federal standards on impact ratings. So each manufacturer uses their own standards. You'll want to know how the testing was conducted and how the ratings for the guardrail you're considering were calculated. The next factor you want to focus on is reducing the presence of forklifts with alternative pallet handling methods. So if you find pallet moving areas that you've got where foot traffic is constant, you might want to review the area to see if you even want forklift traffic to be around it. If not, if you come to the conclusion that you'd like to remove forklift traffic, then you could consider an alternative method for moving items in that area. Some of these methods, and I've got some images there, they include the use of stackers, pallet jacks, pallet dollies, or even conveyors. The third factor you want to focus on is the barriers and physical controls within your facility. So you want to see if control items like the following are in place. I didn't have a picture. So bollards, although I don't have a picture of bollards on there. Gate systems, which is like the product that we show on the left, or flexible handrail, like what we've shown in the image on the right. Now, if you don't have these items in your facility, you'll want to find out if you have the option to install them. But even more importantly, you'll want to figure out if doing so will improve the situation. The fourth factor we want to focus on are visual warning systems. So when I mean visual warning systems, I'm talking about protective systems, like the images show here, systems like sensors or gate technologies, like the aisle cop system that's shown on the left. Warning lights, such as a blue light that attaches to a forklift. We've got that in the middle there. Proximity detection technologies, which is represented over here like the zone safe system that we've got displayed on the right. Or even the use of low-tech options such as mirrors or signs. All of these types of options, they work well because they help to draw the eye towards them, and in doing so, that can aid in keeping awareness a constant. Be sure to assess and score your facility on the presence or absence of these types of visual warning systems. And our final factor to focus on would be training. So some questions that you'd want to ask about your training methods are, well, first off, what do you have in place? So what's currently in place with regard to training, rules, and the current processes that impact forklift safety? So some more specific items within that, sub-questions would be, are workers allowed to use smartphones in the facility? Do your workers pay attention to the pathways laid out? And how are egress points into the facility handled? And also, one to consider is, how are the visitors to your facility protected? And of course, we didn't include this last just to, we're not saying that training is the last resort or isn't needed, but that in some areas, training might not be adequate enough to help protect. We know that OSHA regularly lists training as its primary solution for forklift accidents, but we feel that the right safety equipment and processes can combine with proper training to form a more complete system. So the next step in this process is to define interactions for forklifts and pedestrians. And within this step, you're going to want to, well, first you're going to want to understand and review the areas in your facility where pedestrians and forklifts interact. The other thing you're going to want to do is you want to take steps to segregate people from forklifts as much as possible within these areas. And then you can focus on the interaction zones where separation isn't possible. So why is this step so important? Well, the separation process is critical because it creates a safer space for both pedestrians and forklifts. And that's because, first off, it reduces the amount of interactions between workers and forklifts, which in turn will lower possible accidents within the area. Second, by reducing those possibilities of accidents, you're also lowering the risk of injury. And overall, you're adding to a safer work environment for your facility overall. So we've got an image here on this slide. This image shows an example of how to define interaction zones between forklifts and pedestrians in a facility. So as shown on this layout, we'll discuss it further on the next slide, we've taken the steps to mark the components that you're going to need to know so you can identify problem areas. For you to define these zones in your facility, such as we showed on the previous slide and on the smaller image here, you'll want to do the following. First, you'll want to print a drawing of your facility to correctly map the area. And after doing that, as we showed in the previous slide and on this one, you'll want to create a color-coded visual representation. And in doing so, you'll want to use a specific color to represent the pedestrian traffic aisles in your facility, and then a different color, of course, to represent the forklift aisles or areas in your facility. So as you can see by our example, I'll go back one too so it's a little larger. We've highlighted the pedestrian pathways within the facility in yellow, and the forklift pathways in green. I'm going to stay on here real quick. So the points where they intersect, those will be your interaction zones within your facility. And you're going to want to make sure that you mark and number these zones. So in our example, as you can see, we've marked the forklift and pedestrian interactions with red dots. And in doing so, we've highlighted 10 interaction zones within this facility. So once you've discovered these interaction zones, you're going to want to create a list of them. And once this list is created, you can then work towards addressing the needs that each zone has within the list that you've made. So that takes us to step 4, which is to assess the risk factors in each interaction zone. Flowed pretty well. Now that you've identified the at-risk areas in the previous step, you should rate each of them. And when you do that, feel free to use whatever assessment system you've either come up with or one that you've found that you feel will work for your group within this process. This risk assessment, this will help you prioritize each intersection or crossing and suggest a course of action to reduce the risks in that zone. The review of each zone should include the following factors. So first, you're going to want to focus on accident probability. So within this subject, you'll want to ask questions regarding each zone. We've listed some examples, questions like, how close will forklifts and pedestrians get to each other? How tight is the area that both forklifts and pedestrians are working in? What speed are the forklifts traveling? Is visibility adequate for safe operation? Are pedestrians paying attention to their surroundings? And are drivers, forklift drivers, honking their horns and actively looking for pedestrians? Second, you're going to want to look at the traffic levels within the interaction point. When doing this, you'll want to ask questions like, how often do people pass through or work in the area you're reviewing? And how frequently do forklifts run through? And when you're reviewing this question, you're going to want to check to see if the amount is infrequent, constant, or somewhere in between. Finally, you'll want to look at the frequency of pedestrian-forklift conflict. To do this, you want to count the number of times per day that forklifts and pedestrians intersect, or where forklifts and pedestrians are both present in an area that lacks guardrails or other physical barriers. Now, I want to emphasize that this does not have to be direct contact. It can be the simple presence of both types of traffic in an area where an accident is possible. And once you have profiled each interaction zone, it's time to address each particular point with a plan and a priority. So that leads us to the next step in this process, which is to implement safety upgrades. So you've done the research, you've reviewed the interactions, and you've discovered the zones where forklifts and pedestrians meet and interact. And now it's time to build a solution. Now, these solutions can vary from zone to zone based on the factors in your assessment. And we're going to go over some of these solutions that we think are good ones, which include, first and foremost, whenever possible, create exclusion zones where people and forklifts aren't allowed to interact. And to do this, decide whether the zone can be changed into an exclusion zone where there is no interaction between people and forklifts. You will definitely want to create as many of these exclusion zones as possible, since they are the safest alternative. So, side note, to cover an example that we've seen, this example we've seen is that many companies build pallet rack systems with carton picking on the floor level and bulk pallet storage in higher bays. This is an efficient way to use space, and it does create a full aisle where people and lift trucks frequently share space. Now, this may change plant layout and routes a bit, but the safety gains, from what we've seen, tend to justify it. Next, you're going to want to look to implement hard barrier controls. And as we've discussed before, hard barrier controls would be items such as guardrails, bollards, or gates. And these should be used, you're going to want to use these to create areas where people are physically separated from forklift traffic. Next up, visibility should be considered where possible. And there are many ways to increase visibility, and some of them we've already discussed, but there are also methods like floor striping, signage, forklift warning lights, mirrors, or paint lines. Now, these solutions don't offer as much influence as others, but they are very useful to help reinforce expected behavior and make people aware of the potential dangers. Also, you could consider using gates or straps to close aisles. I'm sure we've seen these types of low-cost methods at a Lowe's or Home Depot to close off an aisle, and they could be useful in your facility as well. Another solution we like is implementing administrative controls, and those would be controls like training, process improvements, and new policies. These are effective ways to teach employees so they can be aware of their surroundings and the dangers they pose. Finally, you could also consider using automated controls as a solution. So when I say automated controls, what I'm talking about is equipment like the following, like warning sensors, automated gates, backup sensors, or even forklift-mounted cameras. So now we've come to the final step in our process, and that step is to measure your progress. So you've taken the steps to review and correct the way forklifts and pedestrians interact in your facility. In order to gauge the effectiveness of these changes over time, we recommend that you do the following, periodically, or as you'd like to see fit. One, you'll want to update your assessment guide to keep it fresh. And what I mean by that is make the process that you've created and that your group has created, make it a living document that can be reviewed and altered where you see fit. New ideas are always going to come up, so allowing them to enter your process will lead to more effective safety policies. Second, you'll want to review the interaction zones that your team worked on to see if further changes should be made. This step is a key one, as new factors that you didn't see the first time you reviewed those interaction zones, those new factors could occur that would make the need for further change in that zone a priority. And finally, you'll want to revisit the process as facility or personnel changes occur. New additions to your warehouse, new square footage, new equipment, new zone because of that, or just new employees and new hires, those will require revisions to your process so your process is still complete and up to date. I've listed some of the resources that we used in creating this presentation. Feel free to ask us for these links, or like was said at the beginning, you can get a copy of the presentation and you can click on any one of these and it will take you to the resources that we used. A couple of them are links to some articles that we've written on our blog and some other safety assessments. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening to our webinar, and I hope that you came away with a better understanding of the forklift pedestrian safety process and how creating one, implementing one, and constantly updating one can help keep your forklift pedestrian interactions safer. As shown on this slide, we've got links to our safety website, social media sites, and our main sales contact for the paper and pulp industry, Alex Gandel, his email is listed there. You can also feel free to call us at the phone number listed below to get more information on this presentation, on the survey that I mentioned before on it, or just to find the right products for your facility. So now, anybody has any questions or has typed any, we can go in and review that.
So we do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one comes in from John DeVoe, and he was asking if you would be willing to allow your survey to be posted on the PPSA website as a resource?
Yes, that's just fine.
Okay. Excellent. Well, we'll get with you and get that posted under our safety resources column.
Certainly.
And then the next question that we had come up was right around slide 29. It comes from Donald Lewis. He says that the bottom center area is a large zone, larger than the red dot, which seems to identify as an intersection.
Let me go to that one.
Might be, probably believe this is the diagram he was probably talking about. On I think it's slide 24.
And traffic.
Yeah, that's a representation of an entire loading dock area where pedestrian and forklift traffic are kind of merging all in that area. Yeah, I forgot to talk about that one when I was on that slide. Apologies.
Okay. Yeah, he just says that the controls would need to be different there. So.
Yeah, he's right.
Just wait a couple more minutes for any last-minute questions. Do thank you all for dealing with the technical issues we had at the beginning of the webinar. I know some of your colleagues had some issues dialing in. We will be expediting the upload of the recording, which will include the audio for everybody to get on to the PPSA website as soon as possible. So our apologies on that again. All right. Well, unless Evan has anything else, I don't think I'm seeing any other questions come in. There will be a survey that you'll be prompted to take as you leave the conference. If you have any questions that kind of come up, please feel free to leave those there, and they'll be directed to Evan or the appropriate party. Do you have anything else today, Evan?
No. I would like to thank the PPSA for having us and allowing us to present this. It was fun.
Great. We're so glad to have you, and we're thankful to have everybody on the webinar with us today. So thank you again for joining us, everyone, and this concludes today's webinar.